The views and opinions on Where Did the Road Go belong to those making them. Do not mistake allowing freedom of speech for agreement. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following amazing individuals: Greg Ross, Billuminati, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have with me, looks like Brennan?
Hello.
Brennan Store.
That is me.
Okay. Not Brendan.
Not Brendan. No, like Brendan, but with no D.
Interesting. And Saxon Super Inframan?
That I answered to that.
Okay. All right.
I love the introduction that sounds like you just heard a noise downstairs in your house and you've come down in the middle of the night to find us raiding your fridge.
That feels about right. Yes.
I would say it's actually what's going on right now. You know,
100%.
couch in the studio.
So tonight we're going to be doing something we haven't done in a couple of years, and I've never done with you guys, which is a deeper exploration of the missing 411 phenomena, or lack of phenomena in some cases. And there's a bunch of stuff I've been saving since the last one. The problem with doing these shows is that there are some people that if you criticize David Paulides' stuff in any way, you will get harassed by them. In fact, one of the things I'm going to read is about that. But to me, I mean, when you have these people who disappear, some of them, I mean, the first time I had David on, I said, well, you know, I feel like a lot of these have prosaic explanations. We just don't have enough info. And then there are the really weird cases. And now we have more and more stuff online that we can research and find old newspaper articles and stuff like that. So it's gotten to the point where you can weed out some of these cases. And when you weed them out, you are left with just a small amount that are very strange cases.
Right.
And those are the ones that are interesting. And also, if people are going missing and there's something weird going on, this is something we need to look more into. But we can't do that if we're just throwing every missing person's case in the same pot. So,
well, and in some cases, not reporting all of the information because it then no longer fits your theory, which is pretty insidious stuff.
It's also human nature, to be honest. You know, you put blinders on, and then you kind of, you know, you have that confirmation bias going on.
Then you write 7 books.
Yeah, right. You were going to say something, Saxon?
Oh, no, you know, that just the kind of willfully choosing not to look to see if there's updated information, too, is frustrating.
Yes. And I've got a bunch of comments here. Let's see. Okay, so like this one's appropriate to this. This was after one of the deep dive 411 shows we did. And KC says, every few months Missing Persons Mysteries does a short update on cases. David could do that, as he makes news videos every other day. One case that really convinced me he may have left out pertinent information was Aaron Hedges, where the sheriff came right out and said David got the dates wrong, and he never mentioned Aaron was going through alcohol withdrawal, which changes the entire story. Other facts he neglected to mention is bow hunters often take off their boots and put on tennis shoes on Once in Pursuit of Game, which would explain why they found his boots. Sheriff also said Aaron hiked the first 15 miles on the first day right before the snowstorm, which makes even more sense. I'd love to be wrong, though. Good show, great guests. And this was the other thing I was going to say about people attacking anyone who criticizes David. The stories we went through last time, which, like I said, was about 2 years ago, I think it was with the Brothers of the Serpent, We quoted mostly stuff from one particular Redditor who had done research on all these different stories and found the majority of them in one chapter had, prosaic explanations. And probably that data was not available, but David should have probably at some point looked and updated it. I mean, he could make a whole nother book out of updating this stuff, but I guess probably wouldn't sell as well as, the weird stories. You know what I mean? But,
and if you've got the new book debunking some of the cases, then you don't have to sell the old books.
That's also true. So one of the other comments was the Redditor you sourced was threatened by one of Paulides' village idiots and consequently decided to leave Reddit. Thankfully, their work exposing Paulides is still posted and could easily be found in missing 411 discussions on Reddit. I invite anyone who is interested in this phenomena to check out these forums. So, I mean, that's the problematic aspect of this. Yes, David could update it. Is it in his best interest to do that? I don't know. Someone recently asked me if David and I had a falling out because he hasn't been on since the Hunter's book. And we never really had a falling out. So the brief version of what happened was that I'm friends with Steph Young, who is currently MIA. And initially, David attacked her, claiming she was plagiarizing his work. She wasn't. She actually made a conscious effort never to write about anything David wrote about because she liked David's work. He never read her stuff and accused her of being a plagiarist.
Oof.
And so that went bad. And then, she was upset because she was just writing the books because she wanted to write the books. She was just collecting weird stories. Most of them were supernatural, not concocting a more in-depth investigation, just relaying stories, like ghost stories type of stuff in a sense. And then she got asked to come on Coast to Coast, and she was going by Stephen Young initially because she figured she'd be taken more seriously as a man, and probably correctly.
Oh, interesting. I always wondered why that was.
Yeah, and so they had her on Coast to Coast, and then first they were surprised that she was a woman, and she's like, yeah. And Steph Young is not her real name. It's a pen name.
Right.
So Stephen Young was a pen name, and so she changed it to Steph because obviously Stephen didn't make any sense at the time. And then she didn't, then she offered to come on my show because apparently she really loved Where Did the Road Go? And so I had her on a bunch of times. And then people started telling David, oh, she's plagiarizing your stuff. And David never looked at her books. Her books were 99 cents, sometimes free on Amazon. He never picked up a single book to see if it was true. He just started accusing her of plagiarizing his stuff.
I mean, with such a long, fine history of, having the facts before he says something, I'm shocked by this.
And so I was a little shocked by this at the time. I'm like, why? What are you talking about? And I had her on like the week before I had him on, and he was, saying something about it. And I'm like, okay, hang on. And I pulled up my notes. I'm like, here's what Steph and I talked about. And I read every single subject we talked about, every single case and subject we talked about. And then there was this long silence, and he goes, I don't write about any of that stuff. I'm like, I know, I keep telling you this.
Oh, boy.
But there was an incident. There was an incident where he got removed from the Missing 411 forum, allegedly, I've been told, because he was being rude to people in the forum. So this was on Facebook. So they kept asking Steph Young to become a part of it, but Steph doesn't like social media, and she kept saying no. So finally, they had kicked him out of it. He was fuming about that. And then they asked her to come in, and she's like, I am not coming into a Missing 411 forum. David already hates me. I don't want to do that. And they said, we're going to change the name. And you don't have to do anything. We just want your name associated with it. And so finally she said, okay, as long as you're going to change the name. They didn't change the name.
Gosh.
And then they made her a moderator, and she never even looked at it. So David starts messaging me, freaking out, saying she's trying to steal his thunder and all this. And I'm like, and I literally woke up to like a ton of voicemails and stuff from David. I'm going, what is happening right now? And so he was upset that I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, she's trying to hurt your stuff. And I'm like, let me talk to her and find out what the hell's going on. And he's like, well, if you're not going to side with me, then I don't know. This is apparent that she's trying to steal my thunder. And I was like, let me talk to her and get the whole story. And that was the last time we spoke. Oh,
you're going to go look for information like some kind of coward, are you? Well, we'll see about that.
So, like, I know someone had asked him why he doesn't come on the show anymore at some conference or something, and he said that he doesn't like that I don't protect my intellectual property or something to that effect. And I know that came from, because people would steal the show and put it up and then, throw a million commercials in it. And right. So I'd have to do takedown notices and stuff when someone let me know that was happening. And there was one guy who actually put them on, like, CDs and was selling them that way.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so David actually went after him because he wasn't just doing my show. He was doing all kinds of David stuff. And David went in, and that's totally fair. He had no right to sell that stuff.
Yeah.
But there was one guy who had asked me, can I use some of your talks with David and stuff? And I said, yes, as long as you're not monetizing it and as long as you're linking back to the original. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So David saw that and got upset, and he's like, why are you letting him do this? I'm like, because I want the information out there, and he's not monetizing it. He's actually interested in this subject. He's trying to help. And then, so David was upset about that. And apparently that was what he was referring to when he said, I don't protect my intellectual property. But I'm fine with people sharing the show, just not, trying to make money off of the show I'm doing.
Right.
So there was that. And then, of course, there was also a point where he put up a list of all his books and when Steph Young released stuff. And Steph, right out front, said she was inspired by Dave's work. But she was also doing paranormal stories. They weren't missing people. I mean, some of them were, but a lot of them were weird stories. But he did the book on the drownings.
Yeah, volume 3.
The Smiley Face Killers. And if that, the so-called Smiley Face Killers, which, I mean, he based it off of the 2 books that were out about the Smiley Face Killers. And she put out a book right afterwards on those drownings. And he's like, look, she put this out right after I did. And I went, but this is just a compilation of all the stuff that's in her previous books, because every book she'd have a chapter on those drownings. And so I had her compile a list of which cases were in which books, and I sent them to him, and they were all published before his book came out.
Of course.
And, and then he just dropped it. So, I mean, did David and I have a falling out? Sort of. I mean, we never said anything, nasty to one another. He just kind of just stopped talking to me because I wouldn't side with him. And I wouldn't side with him blindly. That was the thing, that I wouldn't side with him blindly. I mean, if I felt Steph had done something wrong, I would have called her out on it.
Sure.
Yeah.
I can't not do that. But I don't feel that she did anything wrong. I feel like she got pushed into doing something she didn't want to do. And, they didn't change the name. They did change the name eventually. It took them another month or so, but she got very insistent that they had to change the name of the forum. So, yeah, there's that. So I don't think David really does podcasts anymore. I think he figured he can do his own channel and talk about whatever he wants, and he doesn't have to deal with things.
I've heard of other people try and get him, and they just got no response. I think they've stopped now, but I've heard of folks trying to get hold of him at least.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's fine. He can do it on his own channel. He has a very strong following. But, I mean, to me, I want to know which one of these are the weird stories. I want to know what's going on, and we can't do that if we continue with some of these assumptions. So in that same comment, I started out reading. We're talking again about Aaron. What's his name now? Aaron.
Hedges.
What was it?
Hedges,
yes. And so a comment from someone who goes by Nuck and Futz.
Sorry, that was loud.
That was actually a band out of Elmira at one point. But anyway, he says, this is all true about Aaron's case. He was in the deep throes of alcoholism and was outspoken about the fact that he was going to use the trip to attempt to detox from alcohol, which can be highly deadly. Due to Aaron's physical dependency to alcohol, he was on prescribed medication. In fact, an unfinished bottle of his medication was also found during the search. His hunting partners were very open about how they suspected Aaron was drinking heavily before he separated from them, and it became problematic almost immediately. Yet none of this is mentioned in the 411 book. Aaron was also known to take off his boots and switch on moccasins to soften the sounds of his footsteps when approaching a target. And like you mentioned, this isn't a detail exclusive only to Aaron. This particular detail is widely known and used amongst hunting community, and it is surely a piece of info that Dave would have no doubt come across in his research on Aaron's disappearance. Research that was seemingly pretty in-depth. Aaron's case wasn't just mentioned in his book series. Dave has done many outside interviews, talks, videos on it. Above all, David devoted a huge chunk of time to Aaron's case in his second documentary about missing hunters. He physically traveled to key point areas that Aaron is alleged to have stopped at during that fateful trip. Dave spoke to involved top law enforcement officials, residents of that community, folks who participated in the search, etc. There's no way he would not have been made aware of not just that common detail about footwear, but he would have inevitably stumbled upon all the vital info pertaining to Aaron, many of which you mentioned above, and yet, once again, David omitted these glaring details in his publications. No, go away. Aaron Hedges is just one of many prime examples that highlight the kind of info that Dave intentionally omits. Interestingly, the vast majority of info that Dave leaves out is the kind of info that goes directly against his own profile points. The same people same profile points that he repetitively outlays every chance he gets. Coincidence? Maybe, if it was just one or two cases, but we're talking about several. Far too many for any self-professed expert to miss. And again, Aaron's case is just one amongst many. I can think of several more just off the top of my head, but this comment is already dreadfully long. Anyone can verify this info. Anyone. It's all easily accessible. I'm not saying I don't believe that there's something worth looking at that is occurring in our forested areas. But unfortunately, when members of the public can easily verify your pieces of info that reasonably have to have been intentionally left out, then you lose nearly all credibility. And heaven forbid you raise these valid points and ask questions regarding them on his YouTube page, and you will be straight up bullied. He's created a cult mentality over there. If you say anything that is short of a compliment or isn't absolute praise to Dave, you will be attacked to some degree by his followers and even him. I don't know why, but the majority of people who make up the world of Bigfoot research are incredibly egotistical, and their ego almost always destroys the work they've done. Even if a lot of that work is substantial, it's so unfortunate. The scientific world and everyone else outside looking in are never going to take this matter seriously when the matter is being mostly presented by a bunch of self-righteous, dishonest goons whose egos shatter their own credibility. And then he has a little note at the end that says, and I want to apologize for the length of this comment, but unlike Dave, I didn't want to leave anything out that was seemingly important.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, there's the flip side of the coin as you look at this stuff.
Just to inject a note of levity here, I found an article in the Powell Tribune. I believe it's Powell, Wyoming. And it says, the headline is Missing Hunter. Powell Butcher finds clues for missing Montana man. The article goes on to say, Powell butcher Roger Bislanowicz found items from a missing Montana hunter several miles from where extensive search efforts took place last fall. Aaron Hedges, 38 of Bozeman, went missing during an elk hunt in Montana's Crazy Mountains in September. A 12-day search that followed found little evidence, despite using 20 dog teams, 59 ground searchers, helicopters with night vision and spotlights, and a technical high-elevation team. And a dumbass butcher found it, Bislanowicz said. My wife says I can't find a beer in the back of the refrigerator, but I found all that stuff from the missing hunter. So that's kind of fun.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know what that one is. Okay, so this one's from 7 years ago. Yeah, I actually had written this guy, but he wasn't really online much. I was trying to get him to actually come on the show and talk about this, and I think he just dropped off the face of the earth. But I don't know if it's his real name, but the comment is Hector Abea, and he says, I'll just say as a search and rescue volunteer, David Paulides is full of poop. I've seen his write-ups of some searches that I've been on, and he twists the facts and leaves a lot out, making things seem a lot more mysterious than they are. He also either has very little understanding of lost person behavior, and there's a lot of research on that, or he deliberately misconstrues things to get his mysterious clusters and whatnot. I mean, the thing you mentioned about a lot of subjects being found near rivers and streams is the least mysterious thing ever. People find a stream and assume that if they follow it, it will lead them to a populated area, but either succumb to the elements before they get far enough, or found a stream that peters out in the wilderness, yet he acts like it's some bizarre fact. I could keep going to pick apart his whole profile, but I'm just ranting now. It's a creepy story, but don't trust a word that Paulides says. He's capitalizing on people's real-life tragedies in order to sell books. Sure, I already mentioned the water thing, so the next point, as the OP lists it, is geographical clusters of disappearances. If you look at the maps of these geographical clusters, they just happen to align with remote yet rather popular hiking and camping spots, like in national parks. You have some areas where it's almost impossible to get lost in because they're all paved and extremely clearly marked. You have a lot of areas that are extremely low traffic because they are remote and difficult to get through. There's this middle ground where a lot of people go. They're accessible enough that people without wilderness skills head out there, and they're relatively high traffic. Of course, there are a high number of disappearances in these locations relative to other areas. Bad weather occurring, and the bad weather thing always bothered me. I think I brought that up in the first talk I had with him. Because it's like, oh, well, these people go missing and then they can't find them, and then bad weather moves in, and I'm thinking, but that's also part of why they probably can't find them.
Or why they can't find them. Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah, all right. And he says there are 2 or 3 explanations for subjects being found in areas that were searched. Oh, no, wait, I skipped ahead. Bad weather occurring can be for a couple of reasons. In a lot of parks at higher elevations especially, brief storms blow in more afternoons than not. It also means that we're more likely to find the subject deceased because you can get hypothermia remarkably quickly even in the summer.
Fast.
Time is really of the essence in search and rescue operations, and bad weather that delays or hinders the search is not good for the subject. Since a big part of Paulides' profile is basically there's no coherent narrative of the time missing, a dead subject is going to fit the profile better because they are not able to explain how they got there. Bad weather that isn't quite bad enough to delay the search also hinders visibility and can wash away scent, rendering tracking dogs less effective. This increases the chance that we'll miss an unresponsive subject, who then later might be found in an area that was searched, fits another part of his profile. And speaking of that point, there are 2 to 3 explanations for subjects being found in areas that were searched. For one thing, it isn't always true. Patches of search area get missed due to mapping errors, teams getting called in for the day, and IC not sending another team. I don't know what's IC stand for. Not sending another team to cover the missed area right away, etc. For another thing, we search in grids. The size of a grid is determined by the terrain and conditions. When creating your search plan, you basically try to balance covering a lot of ground with keeping the grid fine enough that you'll probably find them if they're in the area. Especially in areas with heavy underbrush, it's fairly easy to miss an unresponsive subject who crawled into a sheltered area and passed away because it's impossible to cover literally every inch of ground. We're talking massive areas here, even with dog teams. Wind changes and terrain features can prevent a dog from pinpointing a scent. Finally, if it's a massive search, then the subject will probably run into searchers if they're still alive and mobile. But some searches start out pretty small, and people will often keep moving. This is not a good idea in most situations. Just sit down and wait for us if you get lost. They wind up walking in circles and cross back into areas that were already cleared. If there are only a couple of... What was that?
Oh, I was just like, yes, like nodding my head like, yeah, that happens a lot.
If there's only a couple dozen searchers in the field and it's a remote area, it's possible to miss each other. Briars, swamps, and berries are all common enough that it's basically like saying most murders are committed in houses that have cars parked nearby. It's absolutely meaningless. Disappearances in late afternoon are also a sticky thing because from what I've seen, he goes by the time the person is reported missing. Of course, that's normally late in the afternoon because that's when people really start noticing their loved ones aren't back from their day hike or whatever. Most of my search call-outs of all kinds have come between 6 and 11 p.m. The part about them not being able to remember has a few explanations. One, he obviously discards any cases where they can remember because their stories make sense. 2, dehydration, fear, and exposure can make you very weak and even hallucinate in a sort of fever dream way. 3, Many of these cases where people were recovered alive are small children who aren't great at telling coherent narratives and separating fact from fiction, even when they haven't been lost in the woods for some time. Most of the cases I've been on that fit other areas of this profile can remember their stories just fine, so of course they aren't included in his data.
So I just want to jump in real quick. You mentioned IC. It's ICS, and it stands for Incident Command System, and it is apparently used in modern searches in the U.S.
Okay. All right.
So it seems like an organizational system.
Gotcha.
Fascinating. Yeah, even that twilight period in the woods when the sun starts to go down, things look really different really fast, especially if there's a lot of trees and stuff like that. So you've suddenly got way less light than you would even anticipate. And you do end up like doubling back around on stuff and things like that if you're not certain of where you are or where you're going.
Easily.
Yeah. By the way, I was thinking about this a second ago. I'm looking on Google to see if I can find the post from it. But the guy that wrote all the creepypastas about the staircases in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, S.A.R. Woods.
Yeah. It was S.A.R. Woodsman or something like that.
No, just S.A.R. Woods. Just
S.A.R. Woods. He got a cease and desist from David, I believe.
No kidding.
Because people, initially he was posting them without any type of like, hey, this is fiction.
Right.
And so people were taking it as part of why people were disappearing and sort of, meshing it in with David's missing 411 work. And that was one of the reasons that he started like putting out there like, hey, this is something that I'm writing as a creepypasta. At least that's how I remember this when he said he was, going to change how he was writing these creepypasta stories. I'm trying to find the post.
Yeah, we actually covered way back in Ghost, like the first sort of the early days of Ghost Story Guys. We did a show, I think it's called "The Forest is Trying to Kill You" or "The Woods are Trying to Kill You." Because sorry, I always joke about not like in the woods, but we had a lot of people write in and say, "Oh man, like you've got to read these stories. Like, have you heard these stories about these staircases?" And it took like a minute and a half of Googling to find out. No, these are just cool creepypasta stories. They're very, very effective, but they're
entertaining.
Stories. Yeah. But it was crazy how they still every now and again will still get the odd email at the show going, well, what about these staircases in the woods? You guys should do a show on those.
Yeah.
So the shelf life of them has been crazy.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Although, there's something I wanted to say because something you mentioned, Straya, reminded me of something we talked about recently, again over on Ghost Story Guys. And it's the weather thing. And this person, this Abea's explanation for like, the weather, it just, like this is one of those things, or the memory thing, these are reasons why they don't remember. But I wanted to share this story I found on our Haunting of Serbia episode. And I actually translated it. This is translated from Serbian. Cool. It was a lucky find. But the story's called Rainmaker. And basically, in the stories I heard from the old people when I was little, the rainstorm was an event that happened and was described only in Western Serbia, and the first cases happened back in the time of the Turks. Namely, in some regions, there was a woman who punished people who were very evil. She would kill them with some disease or accident. However, if there was a reason why they became evil, she would invite them to talk. She would show them their life from the moment they were born until that day. She would then try to recover them from evil. If that person were to return, it would rain heavily that day. And if the person remained disappeared, then she would be called cursed. But this person would usually come home soaked to the skin exactly 1 year after the disappearance in the same clothes as if seconds or hours had passed for them. They would forget everything that had happened to them, and seconds or hours, it would feel like seconds or hours really would pass. And so I thought that was interesting because I think the Turkish occupation of Serbia ended in, let's say, like the 1800s. So, this is if this is true, this is accurate. This is the phenomenon, this theory or this idea goes back, much further than David.
Oh yeah, no, certainly. Yeah. There's a lot of. I mean, when you look at Phaled stories, we have the lights leading people off into the woods to get lost. There are areas where people, will be on like the edge of a cliff and they'll feel the urge to jump. And there are certain areas where like suicides are common. So there's a psychological thing there, but there's certain areas where this happens more than other places. There are a lot of Aboriginal, native stories about this very thing, about people going missing in the woods. Like, I think it's in Malaysia. They tell people not to wear bright colors if they're going into the jungles, because they will be taken. So yeah, there is a true missing phenomena. I want to be very clear about that. There is a phenomena. The key here is that, like, David did a good service by bringing it to light. However, David has not done a good service by not sorting out what's what.
Yeah. I was going to add to that too. One of my best friends growing up, his family were avid hikers and outdoors people and stuff like that. And we're talking dial-up days of internet just to, put things in context. He got lost on a hiking trail in a national forest ahead of them for about 24 hours.
Wow.
And, he woke up with the park ranger finding him the next day. But in his mind, he thought he was only gone for like 2 or 3 hours.
Right. Yeah.
And it really messed with him.
Oh, sure.
For better or for worse. But he was the first person I knew that had like read about John Mack. He basically thought he had been abducted while he was, that missing time period. And, it sent him down all kinds of rabbit holes as he was getting into college, because he was still trying to figure out, it just shook him so much because there was so little time that he had in his head for, to account for that whole 24 hours he was missing. And, he was the first person I had seen who had kind of composed like a collection, alternate history of the earth, with like the Lovecraftian stuff and the Howard stuff mixed in as channeling and Lemuria and, all of this stuff. But,
all those Cimmerians.
All those Cimmerians, exactly. But, he shared all of that with me and like the timeline he put together and the stuff he was reading. And so like, that's one of the other reasons I'm here right now, was because he was so well read in this early on for me. And when this wasn't stuff that was as easily Googleable. So I got an education from him all out of that one experience, basically. And I still know the guy, and, he still thinks that's probably what happened to him.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's weird. Yeah.
There is a case in one of David's books that's really interesting where these two, I think, farmers, these farm kids, were out checking the property or whatever, and suddenly realized they had no idea where they were. And after a while, their parents or whatever were out yelling for them, and they never heard them. And eventually they kind of were like, wait, now things are starting to look familiar. And it's almost like, and this is a story, this sort of like reality slip thing is a story you hear from Aboriginal, cultures and stuff like that. Where it seems like they're not quite in the same reality.
Right.
Did I ever tell you, sorry, did I tell you my story about the elevator when I was a kid?
Yes. Yeah. Feel free to tell it again for anyone who may not have heard it.
So, yes, basically the story was when I was I was pretty young, right? So I would say about 4 or 5. So you could argue memory is, it is fallible.
Sure.
But we were visiting my mother in the hospital. I think it was maybe just after she'd had my sister. So I would have been, 4 or 5. And we were there. It was the family was in the room. My hometown is a small town. The hospital only has 2 functioning floors. There's a 3rd floor, but it's never been used. It's just storage. And I wanted to stay and visit my mother a little longer. So my grandfather, who had brought me there, he said, "That's fine. You know how to get back downstairs." Because again, the elevator only has so many buttons. And they left me there, and I stayed for a few extra minutes, and then I left. So I remember getting in the elevator. I remember hitting the button. And then I remember the door in front of me opening. And what I was looking at it looked like the hospital lobby, but everything was covered in like dust covers, like it hadn't been used in a very long time. It was empty, and there was this blue light. Everything looked blue. And I remember being really scared, and I didn't know what was happening because it wasn't what I expected to see. But in Revelstoke in the hospital, back then at least, the front desk had sort of like wood paneling, cheap old wood paneling. And so what it looked like to me is it looked like I was looking at the administrative area behind that front desk. But again, But again, everything was covered, and it just looked like no one had been there in a very long time. And so I stood there for a few minutes, and then the doors closed for maybe just a few seconds. I don't remember, but the doors closed in front of me, and then the doors opened. The other doors opened behind me, and my grandfather went, "Oh, there you are," and so he led me out. And I told him what I'd seen, and I remember him telling me, "Oh, when they built the hospital, they built the whole thing, but half of it is not under use. So like the back half of it is exactly like the front half, but we can't afford to staff it, so it's just left empty." And I believe that. I kid you not, for 20 some years. And then when I was, it was actually after I heard a conversation on Micah's show on Gralien. I remembered the memory, and I called my mom, who works at the hospital now, and she's worked there for quite a while as a housekeeper. And I said, "Look, this is what I saw. And if I had taken the elevator to the ground floor, what would I have seen if the back doors opened up instead of the front?" She said that what I would have seen is the hallway to the operating room. And so again, I described what I saw, and she goes, "No, there's nowhere the elevator goes that looks like that." She said the elevator doesn't go to the third floor. And again, what you would have seen is the hallway to the operating room. The lights are always on. What you describe, there's nothing in the hospital that looks like that. And I thought it was weird, but you file it away. And then my wife convinced me to go to this woman in Revelstoke back when we were visiting. Very lovely lady. She sort of combines Reiki and psychic readings. Okay. So she said, "Write down, if you have any questions, write down the question, and then we'll see what we can come up with." So the one question I wrote down was, what happened that day in the hospital? That's all I wrote. And when I woke up, she said, "Oh, your grandfather was here," and he said a bunch of stuff, most of which I don't remember anymore. But in answer to your question, he said, "Brennan, do you remember when you were a little boy and you used to drift between dimensions?"
Huh.
And so yeah, I don't have an answer, but it's just similar to what we're talking about, like this idea that sometimes things slip.
Yeah.
And I have wondered if that is what that experience was.
I mean, I don't think I've had anything that comes to mind that was like that. The closest I have was just a whole sequence of weirdness one night. That's weird in a way that I don't even know how to define. I'm sure I've talked about it on here before, but I was working on editing some video, I think for the Metallic Onslaught, and we had a couple of cameras going, and in this case, it was the time lapse. And so I'm looking at the time lapse footage, and I hear the fire alarm go off on the other side of the house, and I'm here alone, and I'm like, "Oh crap!" Fire alarm. So I stop the video file, run to the other side of the house. There's nothing. Fire alarm is stopped. There's no fire, and I'm like, "Why?" Okay. And I have Huis cams in every room, so I looked at the Huis cam that fire room for that fire alarm, what we call the liminal room, because it's between. It used to be a dining room, but it's not used as that anymore. It's not used as anything specifically. Maybe more of a library at this point. But there was nothing on that camera. And then I looked at the camera for the recording studio, which is the room right next to it. And there is a flurry of what look like orbs that come up and rush past the camera. Oh. And then the fire alarm goes off. And I'm like, okay, I've never seen that before. And I still have the thing saved somewhere. But I was like, well, that's weird. And my girlfriend at the time's like, go hit the couches or something. See if you can recreate it. And I'd hit the couches and you'd see exactly what you'd expect. There'd be nothing for a second, and then you see some dust come straight up. And I'm like, I can't replicate this. I don't know. So anyway, in between, I think I went back and clicked on the video file again, and I was looking at something in normal motion, not time lapse. And I'm like, what am I looking at? Like, this is the same file, right? It's the same file.
Oh.
Why is it playing in normal speed? Like, there was audio, because there's no audio on the time lapse. And I'm like, why is there what? And I closed it and opened it again, and it was the time lapse file.
Bizarre.
And I'm just like, I don't even know how to catalog this.
Yeah. That just goes straight beyond technical glitch into near impossibility.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That footage did not exist, is the thing. Like it absolutely did not exist, yet I was looking at it, and then it was gone. So was I looking at a different reality? I don't know. I mean, something was obviously doing something. But it's like I don't have a good explanation for it. I would say, the orbs were dust, except there was nothing, it was a huge amount of orbs, and there was nothing blowing air around inside the house.
Huh.
And they don't repeat. Like it only happens around the time the fire alarm goes off, which you might say, well, maybe something affected the fire alarm, but they don't just go off. At least not in my experience. They need something.
Maybe if it's connected to a wider system that's having electrical issues, you could maybe make that argument. But if it's a one and done, that seems pretty unlikely.
So. Yeah, I don't know, but that's the closest I have to one of those experiences where I'm just looking at this video going, "This is what?" So going back to the missing 411 stuff, one of the things I took a note about at some point that David will always say that whatever this thing is, which the people in the Reddit group call the 411 monster at this point, he says, well, it has 100% success rate because we've never caught it. And the note I had written down was, no, most of these things are different things, and some people are found. That's an illusion, but it sounds creepy.
Yeah.
So if he has, I don't know how many he has in each, like the first book, if there's 70 cases, maybe 10 of those are legitimately weird cases.
Yeah.
And they may all have different causes. So to say it has a 100% success rate implies it's a singular thing taking all these people through all these books.
Yeah, I mean, that's the danger you run into, I think, when you start trying to make like a belief system around stuff like this, right? It can't be a bunch of different weird explanations. We need one single explanation,
Yes.
I feel like so many of these things come back to a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Stray.
I've come up with an unfortunate way of expressing the way I look at the paranormal. The other book I'm working on that's not my autobiography is a book basically trying to show all the different ways we can look at different phenomena, because so much of this stuff is culturally trapped into boxes.
Yeah. Sure.
And I'm sitting there one day going, I really wish I could come up with a metaphor. And then I realized the best metaphor, it's an unfortunate one, but the best metaphor is cancer. Because cancer is cancer, but it can be all different types of cancer. And it can come from all different causes. So you can get lung cancer from smoking, but you can also get lung cancer from other things. And it's indistinguishable being cancer, So you can have a ghost sighting, and that ghost sighting can be caused by any number of things, but it may look the same.
Yeah.
So, like, cancer is unfortunately the best analogy I have for what I'm trying to explain. I'm not looking for a universal cause. I'm actually saying there's a lot of different causes. And in some cases, those different causes can look like the same thing when they're not.
Yeah.
And just like we have UFOs, Bigfoot, whatever, they're, like cancer's cancer. It's the same basic process, regardless of where it is in your body, but it's caused by different things and it affects you differently.
Right. Yeah, and it's not so much a single disease as it is a cluster of things.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cluster of disorders. We call this one thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, just from the cultural standpoints we're talking about too, because he's saying this thing's got a 100% success rate, right?
Yeah. But
just like the Serbian story that Brennan was telling. And then I was trying to look up, there's an Irish sort of, I guess you would say, addressing the same phenomenon type mythology where certain people will choose to become wolves. And it's kind of like their version of a werewolf.
Right.
But the wolf is not there to hurt you. It's there to help you get out of the forest if you're lost. And it's something that you can choose to do like as a form of service for a certain amount of time. And you get, sort of like credit with the Fae or, the Tuatha De Danann. I'm going to pronounce that wrong, but people know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
The people that live in the mounds. And anyway, but, it's addressing the same phenomenon again. But both of those have explanations and positive outcomes that can happen too, where you're returned in some way. And, the modern creepy story that David is telling is, well, this thing gets everybody.
Yeah.
And what a slasher kind of feeling that has to it, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, in one of the previous shows we did on this, there was a case that I brought up where the woman was out with her dog, and she was on a trail she'd been on a million times, and she stopped to use the facilities that they had along the trail. And while she's in the bathroom, this guy comes in and he says, "I'm going to kill your dog and rape you." And she had a knife, but she managed to get away, and the dog ran, and her and the dog got separated, and eventually she got lost because she just bolted. I mean, she was in a blind panic.
Right.
And she, so eventually her husband's like, where's my wife? And so they called, search and rescue, and they went out looking for her, and they found the dog, but not her. And if that's where the story ended, it would have been in a missing 411 book. Well, the dog came back. She knew the trail. There was no sign of foul play. There was, it fits every bit of criteria. The part that doesn't fit is that they found her. Because she had run off, she was in an area they did not expect her to find her in. And she had been, like I said, separated from the dog right from the beginning, I believe. And it was just luck that they found her and then got the whole story. So, like, if you cut it before they find her, it fits the 411 criteria to a T.
Right.
But then you get the ending, and it's like, oh, this was just an awful person that she encountered, and it caused this situation.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably a decent amount of that in those books where we just don't know because maybe that person never got found. So it looks weird. It looks creepy. Like, oh, they knew this area. How could they be lost?
Yeah, yeah. And I am, the creepy part of me always worries about like random strange people in some of these national forests that are out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that some of these disappearances are not supernatural, but there's foul play involved that we'll never know, and I think that's a real thing that happens too. And occasionally you'll hear stories where people will have seen someone like following them, but once that person got seen following them, then they're not there anymore because they realize they got caught. Basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that scares the crap out of me.
Yes. I'm not so much worried about the paranormal things in the woods. It's the creepy people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
There's sorry. Did we go ahead, Brent?
Oh, well, I was just going to bring up the experience of the other person that's with you sometimes when you get lost like this. There's different stories about it. The one I always think of, there was a girl in Arkansas that got lost for a couple of days when she was like adolescent. And while she was lost, there was another girl with her. And of course, when she was found, she turned back around and the other girl that was with her was gone.
Right.
And you can find it written up as like an imaginary friend or these other things like that. But I've come across stories like that more than, a few times. And you can say it's a psychological experience and you could say, it's something else. But it does remind me also of like the stories where you have like the child that's lost and a bear takes care of him, but then the bear's not there when the search and rescue people find the lost child. It feels similar to that in a way.
Well, there was that one story from North Carolina that was like that, where the kid said he survived because of a bear took care of him. And this was in temperatures that he could not have survived in on his own. So who took care of him? That's a weird, that's a legitimately weird one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is, I'm pretty sure, 99% sure we talked about this story at some point in the past. Woman who survived 17 days in Maui jungle in Hawaii. I'm so grateful to be alive.
Oh, wow.
4 days after she was rescued from the dense Maui forest where she'd spent more than 2 weeks, surviving on wild fruits and river water and walking on a broken leg, Amanda Eller addressed reporters for the first time Tuesday, saying she struggled to remain optimistic as the days wore on, and she heard choppers overhead but couldn't flag them down. You lose hope and your hope meter starts to decline a little bit as the sun starts to go down, said Eller, who was rescued on her 17th day in the jungle. She said her darkest moment was after being lost for 2 weeks, with passing helicopters unable to spot her despite her efforts to make herself more visible. In a moment, I was mercy. I just say mercy. I'm looking up at the sky like, please pick me up. I'm ready. Eller, wearing a flower in her hair and a broad smile, added, it's good to be alive. People are holding me up as a hero, and I don't feel that way. I'm so happy that my story can inspire others. At the news conference Tuesday morning, Eller was flanked by her parents but did most of the talking. Her story, from her disappearance, the grueling weeks-long search to her miraculous rescue, has generated international attention. It also generated some skepticism on social media. I think there's a lot of confused, delusional people out there, she said. I'm not taking it to heart, and I'm not taking that energy in, so I'm grateful to be alive. She added that on the day she headed out to the woods, she ate a small breakfast. She also made the point to say that she had no alcohol or drugs. I get high on life, she quipped. The 35-year-old said when she was found Friday, at that point, wary of venturing too far from my water source, my heart just fell through my feet. I fell to the ground and started bawling. She told reporters Tuesday that she headed out on a hike on a whim and had planned to go on a short 3-mile walk. She didn't bring a cell phone, water, or any provisions, a decision she acknowledged Tuesday was a bad one. I should have had a cell phone with me, she said. I just thought I was going for a short little jaunt. Shortly after she started to walk, she said, she stopped to meditate and then became disoriented when she reopened her eyes. She says she eventually realized that the hiking trails she was on were actually boar pathways. Eller was reported missing by her boyfriend on May 9th, the day after she headed out to the Kahakapoa Loop Trail. A massive search ensued, with volunteers and rescuers spending hundreds of hours looking for any sign of her. The Maui Fire Department suspended the search after several days, but a team of volunteers continued heading out to the woods, scouring a widening search area from sunup to sundown. Eller addressed the fire department's decision to halt the search, barring any new leads. What I ask is this be taken more seriously, that missing people be taken more seriously, she said. On a state level, we are able to expand those policies so that we know that our tribe is taken care of. On her 17th day in the woods, a helicopter pilot contacted her family and spotted Eller in a dense forest area, roughly 4 miles from the parking lot where her vehicle and personal items were found. She was airlifted to safety and taken to the hospital, where she was reunited with her family.
Wow. 4 miles.
Yeah, just 4 miles, and they couldn't find her. Well, there's more here.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Saying I found an ABC News retrospective on the story, and she says she fell 20 feet and broke the tibia in her left leg.
Okay, all right.
Imagine being out there for that long with a busted leg.
I thought there was a weird element of music involved in it too, like either she got lost because she was following some music, or they found her because they were following some music. But maybe I'm thinking of a different case. But again,
not mentioned here, but then it could be like that whole thing, like with Shackleton, right? Where sometimes if the story doesn't make sense, the subsequent drafts kind of get left out.
True.
The things get left out.
And you know, but even so, again, this would have been a missing 411 case if she hadn't been found.
Yeah.
Because it was a trail she knew well. Why would she go out there without her cell phone? Because people do stupid stuff sometimes. These are the things you'll see David ask over and over, like, well, why would someone leave their wallet in the car? There could be a number of reasons someone would leave their wallet in the car.
Yeah. Oh, all this, I was trying to remember what all these stories were reminding me of again, but, I got to go on my trip to Iceland a couple months ago.
Oh, nice.
And, yeah, it was great. But there's this funny tourist attraction that is basically the remnants of an airframe of a DC-9, DC-3, excuse me, DC-3. And it's been there for, I think, since just after World War II on one of the beaches. And it was a situation where like it crashed, but it just ran out of fuel and they weren't quite sure where they were. They knew that they were close to this part of the island, so they landed on the beach. And the United States, it's their aircraft, came and got all the things out of it that were worth something and then left basically the airframe. And it's become a tourist attraction that people will walk down the beach. And I think it's a 7-mile walk. It's not an awful one or anything like that. But it ended up in a Justin Bieber video. And so now people want to go see it. And a couple of years ago, there was an influencer there that was going to take pictures at the airplane. And she was not dressed for potential changes in weather. She was dressed for her influencer photo shoot. And, weather rolled in. It was a whiteout snowstorm. And they died within 100 yards of their car. But they couldn't see it. So they couldn't get to where it was to get warm. And so, anytime these weather things get brought up, it just makes me kind of think about stuff like that, where you're like, this is how pilots die all the time in little aircraft.
Yes.
Because they go out for a VFR day and weather rolls in. And anyway, I know this is a little adjacent, but I should have brought this up sooner, but my brain was trying to remember the story. But, it's one of these things where it's experienced photographer, and these people go out for a photo shoot, and they, if they hadn't been found so close to their car, it would have been another, I don't know if David would have left out some details. I think we all would have figured out when you got snow that bad, it's going to kill you.
Right.
But still, it's got the essence of this creepiness there. And it's just because they didn't prepare that the weather could change.
Right. Right.
And I think this is the danger you run into when you start trying to extrapolate behavior from random things. So why would no one would leave their wallet behind? Well, they might though.
Yeah,
they might. Yeah.
Or they died feet away from the car. I mean, maybe they didn't know, depending on the weather, maybe they didn't know the car was there. If they were socked in. I think about sometimes with that McCandless kid.
Yeah.
He died in 92 or 93?
I don't remember this one.
It was the John Krakauer wrote the book about him, Into the Wild.
Yeah,
okay.
Bear guy.
Which one?
I call him the bear guy.
Was he? I don't remember the bear in the story.
Chris McCandless, right? Didn't he die from the berry poisoning in the bus?
Oh, the berry guy. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And he was, because he threw out the map, he had no idea where he was, but he was actually he could have been saved. Mm-hmm. And if you were to look at that in isolation, you'd say, well, there's something going on here, because he was relatively he could have been saved, and he wasn't. So there's something up. But sometimes you just can't account for. I don't want to say human stupidity, because we're talking about a person who died, but there is a certain amount of hubris involved there. You can't discount laziness or just mistakes or a random choice that, because it happened on a significant day, the importance of it suddenly gets magnified, but it doesn't actually mean anything.
We all do stupid things. We all do things that you look back on and be like, why did I do that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think more than most of us would like to admit.
I remember I told this story a little while ago over on my show. I was saying that we had this green belt in my hometown, and it's sort of in a rural area, so it's not very well traveled, especially at night. And I stupidly, one night, I know better. One night I was going for a walk. I thought, I'll go for a walk on the green belt. Now we have bears in our town. We're quite an isolated place. And I just went for a walk on this green belt. And then at one point I passed underneath a bridge, and there was a dude up on the bridge, and he watched me come from one side, come under the bridge, watched me come out the other side. And then after I was maybe 50 to 100 feet away from the bridge, he climbed down the bank and started walking along the path, catching up with me.
Oh, wow.
And I saw him coming, so I sort of arced off the path, went up the bank and towards the road, at which point, he kind of just stopped, watched me go, and then kept going.
Wow.
But if I'd gotten jumped and something had happened, people would have said, well, what's going on? He's smart. Yeah. He knows better than to go there. And I did. Mm-hmm. But that night, I was just taking my stupid pills.
Mm-hmm.
What's the Dennis Martin case? This was a comment someone left, because one of the questions, and a lot of what I'm reading today are comments that people have left on these shows or left in the Reddit forums. So this information isn't coming from me, because I don't know this stuff. But John Smith, totally his real name, says, the Green Beret mystery solved for you. Ranger Myers contacted U.S. Forest Service Ranger or District Ranger on the Nantahala, who in turn made contact with Colonel Kinney, commanding the Special Forces troops in that area. Colonel Kinney requested and obtained permission from the 3rd Army headquarters at Fort Benning, Georgia, to transfer 40 Special Forces to the search area. There was nothing mysterious about it. Because that was one of the things. Why were the Green Beret involved? What did they know? And in this case, it looks like they were just asked to help.
Yeah.
And again, that's that like drawn conclusions based on limited information.
Yes.
Like I recently did the audiobook version of my book Strange Little Place, and reading some of the chapters out loud for the first time in several years, I kind of realized, these are unrelated events that are totally mundane. And one of them was these people claimed to have seen this UFO, and then the next morning they went through town and there was this bank of fog. There were these military vehicles with strange looking equipment, and they had a bunch of SUVs traveling in convoy. And at the time, I sort of figured out, okay, so, there is a military base in Cold Lake, Alberta, which is, about 9-10 hours away from Revelstoke, but it's there. But why would they have been there? And I did a bunch of research, and I realized, it's because there was a memorial for this famous avalanche that had happened, 50 or 75 years before. And if I actually did a Freedom of Information request, and they were in town. They had lights and projectors. They were doing a big show of it. So these people saw the light from their light show and drove through town. They saw these really imposing military-looking trucks, but they were just a bunch of officials coming down to sort of pay tribute for this big celebration, and then just driving back to the military base because that's what they do. All completely innocuous stuff, but to outsiders coming from out of town, it looked really sinister. It looked like they saw something, they know something, and they're here to cover it up.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Quick mid-show break here. Some contact info and a recommendation. The contact info is real simple. WhereDidTheRoadGo.com has everything you want. All the social media links. You can become a patron. And all the emails are there under the contact link. You can get merchandise. You can listen to any show all the way back to the first one back in 2013. And I just recently uploaded all the 2013 shows to Acast, so they'll be available on podcatchers, because the RSS feed will only handle, I think, 50 shows, and people were complaining they couldn't listen to everything on their podcatcher and just stream it. So I just kind of dumped all the 2013 shows on Acast. It took me like 2 days of just constant, very tedious work to get them up there, so I hope people appreciate them. And if you haven't checked them out, well, go ahead. All right. As for a recommendation, I'm going to go with something I'm watching now. It's called Impulse, and it came out just prior to the pandemic. I'm not quite finished. It has 2 seasons. I don't know if it has an ending, but it's kind of neat. It's an interesting concept. From the description, I thought this was going to be a girl experiencing unusual electrical activity. It's more like teleportation, and it's very well written. There's some subtleties in there that I really appreciate. Whoever made this did a very good job, and I find myself enjoying it quite a bit. It rates pretty high on IMDb as well, so apparently other people also enjoy it. So, yeah, that would be my recommendation. Came out a few years back. I think it's available on YouTube TV and a couple other things. There you go. All right, back to the show. So I'm here with Super Inframan, sometimes known as Saxon.
Hello.
And Brennan Storr.
Hello.
Said your name correctly.
Indeed.
I know what your name is, but sometimes Brendan comes out.
I have been called Brendan, Brandon, Brendan, Brienne on several notable occasions. So that's fine.
Okay, so one of these other Reddit articles I clipped a while back is it's entitled, "I Know Who Undressed Florence Jackson." And then it asks if Can-Am is ready to retract these 3 cases. Okay, so it says, introduction. It is imperative for a researcher not to let personal bias affect their research. The question of how well Can-Am researcher David Paulides manages to remove his own personal bias when looking into missing person cases. Is David Paulides good or bad at it? And the first case is Frank Floyd from 1897. He went missing in Iowa. And the version David has says David Paulides introduces the Floyd case like this. I could only find one article on the disappearance of Frank Floyd, and this appeared on January 8th in the New York Times. It stated the following. Atlantic City, Iowa, for January 7th. Frank Floyd went hunting in the Big Timber 15 miles north yesterday and not returning today. A party went out in search of him. They tracked him through the snow and at last found his body literally torn to pieces. His gun was found near him, and a short distance away was an old sow laying dead with a broken leg and a bullet hole through her. David then tries to make sense of what he just read. The article implies that the sow killed the hunter. I don't think so. Hogs don't move quickly with a broken leg, and Frank could have killed it with his rifle. I don't know what is in the Iowa plains in the middle of January that could tear a man to pieces. Paulides then concludes by saying, the article also states it was not known that there were many hogs in the area, and someone felt Frank was killed after he shot the sow. So then it says what really happened. Let's deconstruct what the New York Times article says. What David Paulides claims to New Yorker... Oh, I guess these are headings. Okay. The article implies that the sow killed the hunter. This is a straw man, a deliberate misrepresentation. The article does not imply the sow killed the hunter. The article implies other hogs killed Floyd after the sow was shot and killed. I don't think so. Paulides, who claims to never offers any theories, knocks down the straw man he just created. Hogs don't move quickly with a broken leg, and Frank could have killed it with his rifle. This conclusion is probably correct, but since the article still does not say the sow with the broken leg killed Floyd, this statement is misleading. I don't know what is in the Iowa plains in the middle of January that could tear a man to pieces. How can you not know this when the article says the other hogs did it? Why invent a what that can tear a man to pieces when we already have the answer? The article also states that it was known that there were many hogs in the area. This is correct, but the New York Times article also states, and David decided not to quote this sentence, from numerous marks in the snow, it is supposed he was attacked after he killed the sow. So the hogs were not only in the area, they were right there.
Yeah. He didn't say what kind of caliber his rifle was again.
I don't think so.
Depending on how you shoot wild boars, especially some of the males, like their skulls are interesting, you're just going to irritate them. I was going to say something else, but I remember this is a radio show. I mean, that's, there are a few things in the woods that I'm like genuinely afraid of running into. And I never want to run into a male boar. No,
absolutely not.
Yeah, if that thing's charging at you and you're trying to shoot it with a rifle as quickly as you can, so you're, under duress trying to aim and things, those tusks will run up you like a zipper. I mean,
they'll make you a zipper. Yeah. And then it says, and someone felt Frank was killed after he shot the sow, according to David. It is more than a feeling. Evidence shows hogs attacked Floyd. So Paulides misrepresents what happened by claiming the New York Times article implies the sow killed Floyd, introducing a what that can tear a man to pieces, not mentioning marks in the snow that show other hogs attacked Floyd. David Paulides claims I don't know why he says his full name every time he mentions it. David claims he vets out animal attacks. So Paulides thinks Floyd was attacked by something that is not an animal then. No contemporary sources state anything unnatural, supernatural happened to Frank Floyd.
So just want to jump in. I found this because I can't help myself. I'm going to explode here. While I was looking this up, I was trying to find other cases of bodies being eaten by hogs or people being attacked by hogs. And I found a story that originally appeared on Unsolved Mysteries in 1994. Are you familiar with a young boy named Michael Huis?
Well, I know Mike Huis.
Okay, so this is Michael Huis. He attended Indian Meridian Elementary School in Choctaw, Oklahoma. And on September 12th, 1994, a man claiming to be his father entered the school and pulled out a gun, and took the boy. So now the boy was never recovered, and the FBI believes that his remains were eaten by hogs.
Wow!
But this is what made me interrupt you so rudely. The name of the man who did it?
Yeah,
Frank Floyd.
Huh. That's an interesting connection there.
Yeah, the murderer's name was Franklin Floyd.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, weird.
So there's some strange synchronicity.
Yeah.
And Michael Huis has been on this show many times. Obviously, not the same Michael Huis.
Yeah.
So the second case he has here is Roger Schadinger from 1951. Was 9 years old when he went missing in California. The 9-year-old boy was fishing with family on the banks of Elder Creek when he wandered off. About 25 to 28 hours later, he was found by a Native American tracker named Archie Hicks. So David's account, decades after the event, David Paulides writes, a May 29, 1951 article in the Nevada State Journal had the following statement. He told them he had been hiding from the people. On the same day, there was an article in the San Mateo Times where Roger had stated that he thought they meant to do him harm. It was never made clear who the people he was hiding from were. Some articles made the implication Roger was hiding from the searchers, but that made zero sense. So that's what David says. David dismisses the idea that the people refers to rescuers because it made zero sense. Paulides also implies there is a potential conspiracy going on, a cover-up by journalists. Quoting, I've heard stories of small boys stating they were hiding from people who were following them. There is never clarity in the newspaper articles about what the boys were hiding from, possibly purposefully. What really happened? Is the claim there was never clarity in the newspaper articles about what the boys were hiding from correct? When we go back to the original sources, it's very clear the people refers to the rescuers and nothing else.
I'm looking at the original article right now via the magic of newspapers.com, and the boy says, the article says, clad only in a t-shirt and shorts, the boy deliberately avoided the 150 searchers who threaded their way through the brushy, mountainous country looking for him. He thought they meant to harm him, he said. They almost found me twice last night, he told his rescuers. Searchers said it was a wonder that the scantily clad boy had lived through the frosty Sierra night. Except for 2 very sore feet and the empty stomach, he seemed none the worse for his experience.
Yep. So, I mean, these are early cases that David had put out. And these were the ones I thought were a little more genuine. And now I'm seeing, going through these that, and it might just be, it might be confirmation bias on his part. I'm not saying he's doing it intentionally, but he is making it sound more mysterious than it actually is.
Yeah.
Even if it's just leaving out little things like hog tracks in the mud, where it's like, yeah, there were hogs here. He leaves that out completely. Or this, where who are these strange people? And the kid literally says it was the people looking for me. So it says no contemporary sources state anything unnatural or supernatural happened to Roger Schadinger. So the next one and the last one here was Florence Jackson from 1937. 4 years old, went missing in Arkansas. Florence Jackson was walking with her grandfather in a forest at Cedar Valley when she asked him for his permission to return to her parents' car. But Florence failed to return to the car. 4 days later, naked Florence Jackson showed up at a farm where she was rescued by Mrs. Godwin. Florence was taken to the hospital where she told hospital staff and law enforcement that she spent one night with an African-American couple who put me on a cot and gave me breakfast and then told me to go on. The first nights she spent outdoors alone, she said. Hospital staff and law enforcement discounted this idea because few or no African Americans lived in this specific area. Her parents thought it was a dream rather than reality, and an AP article says Florence spoke in disconnected phrases after the ordeal. David writes, approximately halfway to the mill, Florence states that she wanted to go back to the car where her mother and father were located and turned and ran toward the auto. She never made it to the car. This comes from the Eastern United States book, which I think is the second of the first two. Later on, searchers found Florence's shoes and clothes within half a mile of where she was last seen. The stockings were found about 15 yards apart. Paulides goes on to speculate the findings stumped the searchers. Why would a little girl take her stockings off at 15-yard intervals? It was almost as if something was carrying her and stripping her clothing as he or she was running. But this was a 4-year-old girl, not an easy feat. David then offers his readers his own personal opinions. I believe that something very, very strange happened to Florence, and she probably has subconsciously suppressed much of the story in an effort to block out a very negative experience. She is probably trying to tell the truth the best she can without her mind going to a bad place. So, what really happened? David mentions Florence wanted to go back to the car, but he does not tell his readers the reason why. The Chicago Tribune explains why. When a short distance into the woods, Florence, who was wearing new shoes, complained of a blister on one of her feet and asked permission to return to the automobile. This is mentioned by multiple newspapers, and it's impossible for a researcher to miss. So it is not strange that Florence removed her shoes after a while, but who or what removed Florence's clothing? Florence removed the clothing herself. The child accounted for the lack of clothing by saying her dress and bloomers became wet, so she took them off and threw them away. She states she did not have a stitch of clothes on when she showed up at the farmhouse. She told the Godwins that the dress got wet and mussed up, and she threw it away. Florence Jackson soon recovered and was described by journalists as pert and cheerful. There was another part to this. Okay. So, if you remove two objects and throw them on the ground, they will always be X yards apart. It just happened to be 15 yards. David's question, therefore, makes little sense. It was almost as though someone was carrying her and stripping her clothing as he or she was running. The child accounted for a lack of clothing by saying her dress and bloomers became wet, so she took them off and threw them away. She told the Goodwins that the dress got wet. Again, we just said that. You cannot conclude someone carried Florence and stripped her naked just because her stockings were 15 yards apart. Why does not David mention Florence Jackson removed her clothing? But this was a 4-year-old girl, not an easy feat. We have no indication Florence found it difficult to undress herself. She was 4 years old, after all. It was unclear whether she was calling for her mother or someone else in the area to come. What exactly is David implying here? Florence Jackson said she called for her mother to come once she hid in the woods when she saw two strange men. It was unclear who these men were. I just lost my place. It's probably members of the search party. Why does David feel it necessary to remove probably members of the search party from the quote and instead claim it was unsure who these men were or what was strange about them? I believe that something very, very strange happened to Florence, he says, and she probably has subconsciously suppressed most of the story. She is probably telling the truth the best she can without her mind going to a bad place. No original sources state Florence was suppressing information. Instead, she spoke openly about what happened to her. What a researcher believes is 100% irrelevant. The researcher has to be professional enough to remove their own personal bias. In this case, David believes something very strange happened to Florence. For someone who never speculates, Dave speculates an awful lot. Paulides does not like to talk. Did not talk to Florence when she was found, so he had absolutely no idea if she was suppressing anything. So in this case, he invents a someone who carries and undresses Florence, omits the reason Florence wanted to return to her parents' car, omits the fact Florence undressed herself, implies Florence subconsciously suppressed what really happened to her without presenting any supporting evidence. No contemporary sources state anything unnatural or supernatural happened to her. So that's, again, just little things like that can really change the timbre of a story. What it doesn't explain, I don't see in here anywhere, it doesn't explain how she got lost just running back to the car, but she also was a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at an article from the Baltimore Sun. It's dated Friday, September 10th, 1937. And I think this is a really interesting example of the thing we were talking about where someone will make an assertion and the assertion may or may not be correct, but a lot of things are then predicated on that assertion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So according to this article in the Sun, this is before she was found. It says searchers under the subtitle or subhead, no food available. It says searchers said there was no food in the woods except for green persimmons. The father, Arthur Jackson, coal miner of Chelsea, Oklahoma, suggested the child might have been picked up against her will by a passerby in the woods. Then a little further down, it says, heard child cry. Florence, tiny and red-haired, wore a light blue dress, bloomers, socks, and new shoes. She complained one shoe had rubbed a blister and said she wanted to return to the family automobile, parked on a highway at the edge of the woods. I heard her voice after she turned back and thought she had rejoined her grandmother, said Jackson. Then, half an hour later, I heard her cry off in the woods. I ran in the direction of her voice, but she had disappeared. So now, if you look at the next day from the Tampa Times, Saturday, September 11th, 1937, after she's been found, it actually says the woman who she approached, a woman named Goodwin.
Right.
Can't find the name. But Mrs. Goodwin, she said that when the girl called to her from across Indian Creek, she didn't have a stitch of clothes on, that her words. She told the Goodwins that her dress got wet and mussed up and that she threw it away. And Mrs. Goodwin also said she was eating a tomato and some sheep sorrel, which is apparently an edible weed.
Oh.
And she said that she had been eating them and wild grapes. So obviously the food was out there.
Yeah.
And, contrary to what the searchers said, but so much gets based on this notion that, well, they said there's no food, so who gave her the food?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was no mention of the African-American people she supposedly slept at their house or whatever.
Correct. I've gone through 3 different articles, and nothing that has not been mentioned whatsoever. Pneumonia, that's come up, but nothing about nothing about her seeing anyone.
Huh.
Interesting.
So I wonder where that piece came from.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think through too, because I'm like, well, it's 1937, if you were a black couple and this girl shows up at your house, you're like, okay, we'll take care of you, but you're going to have to go in the morning, just kind of for your own safety. So people don't think.
Yeah.
But, if it's not mentioned anywhere else, then maybe it just didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, now I'm reading another article in the St. Joseph News Press from St. Joseph's, Missouri. And I think this might be a Wire article because the text is almost exactly the same as the one in the Tampa Times. So again, maybe that got trimmed out before the article, before it was sort of widely disseminated. But it just says that no, she was naked, haggard, scratched by burrs. And basically it says she turned up at the Goodwin's house. She asked for a drink of water. She drank that and some warm milk and then fell asleep. And interestingly, it's hard to find these articles because only a few months before that same year, a woman named Florence Jackson was murdered in New York State.
Oh, wow.
So a little bit confusing there, but I'm going through more and more articles and I'm finding no mention whatsoever of these people.
So I wonder where, because that's only in the Paulides account. And he even comments that somebody said there were no, black people in this area. I went too far back. I went up to the top one. Nope, there we go. Yeah, hospital said this. So Florence was taken to a hospital where she told hospital staff and law enforcement she spent a night with an African-American couple who put me on a cot and then gave me breakfast and told me to go on. This comes from the News and Observer, September 12th, 1937.
September 12th, 1937. Okay, well, let me see if I can find it. Interestingly, they're all like, I've got September 11th, September 13th. I'm not seeing anything on September 12th so far.
Huh. And the first night she spent outdoors alone. And then it says the hospital staff and law enforcement discounted this idea because few or no African Americans lived in this specific area. Her parents thought it was a dream rather than a reality. That comes from the Atlanta Constitution, September 13th, 1937.
Okay.
So I'm going through. So this is from the Springfield Leader Press, September 13th, 1937. This saying, Florence said she lived on weeds, wild grapes, and tomatoes while in the woods, but could not remember where she got the tomatoes. So that's the only mention so far I've seen. I'm continuing to look for other articles dated around that time. You do wonder though, like sometimes you think, are they just? I don't want to say lying, but are they just sort of hoping no one's ever going to check these things?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, kind of feels like that, doesn't it?
Well, you said it.
Yeah. Well, and I don't like the connotation of that either between, it seemed like someone was taking her clothes off and then the only people, she encountered happened to be an African-American couple.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. If that was done to infer something, I'm pretty disgusted.
Huh. Well, yeah, but she said she took her own clothes off.
She did. Yeah. I'm just sort of like, I don't know, just interesting.
So I've gone through a couple more articles and have seen no mention. I did find one dated Sunday, September 12th, but again, no mention whatsoever of any African American people being involved.
Huh. That's so strange.
So there is the St. Louis Post-Dispatch from the 12th. It does have other comments from her. She says, once I slept on a flat rock and I caught cold and called for mother. She said she once hid in the woods when she saw two strange men, probably among the 700 who hunted her.
Right.
She said she slept one night in a log, once in a tree. And that's it. Again, no mention of anyone else. And that's the St. Louis Post-Dispatch dated September 12th, 1937.
Huh. So I wonder where those two articles. I mean, maybe these two articles are not digitized that this information came from.
Very possible. Very possible. I mean, there are finite resources in these places.
Yeah. And I know David got a lot of these from other missing persons pages. There's two in particular he took a lot of this stuff from. So I don't know, but he's clearly, there's little doubt at this point that he at least has confirmation bias going on.
Yeah, I can't argue with that.
This says, at the end, it says, these three cases exemplify how David Paulides openly rejects parts of the source material because they do not fit his narrative, deliberately omits part of the source material that do not fit his narrative. Didn't he just say that? Or rejects, okay. It's the same thing. Frequently claims things were unclear, even when they were not unclear. Invents characters not supported by the source material he uses. In the Floyd case, Paulides invents a what that can tear a man to pieces. In the Schadinger case, Paulides invents the people who are not rescuers. And in the Jackson case, Paulides invents a something that carried Florence and stripped her naked. This tells us David Paulides is not actually researching missing persons cases, but is merely using missing person cases to project his own inner ideas where undefined somethings interact with people and make them go missing. It may be an entertaining read, but it is not real research.
Yeah. So I just found one.
Okay.
Now, this is from the Hammond, Indiana Times, Sunday, September 12th, 1937. Headline, Girl 4 Held Prisoner. It appears to be from the UP. I guess that's probably United Press, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think so.
40-year-old Florence Jackson, found today after being missed 5 days, today told her mother and a nurse at Berryville Hospital that she was held prisoner in an Ozark mountain cabin by two Negroes. The child told her mother, Mrs. Arthur Jackson, and the nurse, Vera Gentry, that she was held by a man and woman and that they gave her food, white bread and butter. But no other mention so far at least, mention of these people.
Very odd.
Huh. Yeah, so I'm going to expand my search terms a little bit here and see if I can't find more.
Well, so we're going to have to continue that on a Patreon because we are out of time.
Okay, that went fast.
Yeah, it does that.
Yeah.
So where can people find you, Brennan?
You can find me over at the Ghost Story Guys podcast on ghoststoryguys.com, everywhere fine podcasts live. You can find my fiction show, Fear Daily, written by me, hosted by Brandon Scheck-Snyder, and that is 2 new horror stories every weekday, Monday to Friday. And again, that's Fear Daily at feardaily.com or everywhere fine podcasts live.
And Saxon, if people want to interact with you, where can they do that?
The best place to track me down these days is on Instagram. I'm Super Infoman on there. And then, I float around the Discord a little bit for Where Did the Road Go?
I try to do that. I don't have a lot of time to do that, and I always feel bad about it, but I do try to get on the Discord here and there. All right. Well, thank you guys. We'll continue this conversation in a Patreon segment.
Thank you. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. I can't do this without you. So thank you for supporting the show. And know that every positive thing that comes out of this show is partially because of you. I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons who are pledging $10 or more a month. Greg Ross, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Marty Garza, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Midnight Review Presents, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Billuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Corey Nelson, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Jonathan Frost, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Shurek, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda from Michigan, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Shoemaker, Mark Brady, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sarah Horgan, Sasha McHale, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Stevie Norman, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic podcast, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varush K., Victoria, Vincent Treewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Craig Sagastumi, and Matthew Brown. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. All right, as we just said at the conclusion there's a long Patreon segment for this show. And if you want to become a patron, it's only $3 a month. You get extra content almost every show. You get the shows a week, sometimes 2 weeks early. You get them commercial free. You get a lot for just $3. I also throw in some extra stuff here and there, secret stuff. And fun stuff like AMA shows and things like that. So, for $3 a month, you help out this show, you help us keep going, and you get a lot of extra content. I do want to welcome one new patron this week, and that is Sandra Becca. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy the content. Next week's show, we have Jim Harold returning after quite a few years with a new campfire book, so some spooky stories next week. And if you have a story you want to share with us, stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com is the email to use. I also do a music show, and it's a heavy, dark music show, but there's a lot of stuff there you're not going to hear anywhere else, so you may find your new favorite band by listening to The Last Exit for the Lost. And there's also a lot of movie reviews and other stuff that goes on in between talk breaks. Stories about what's going on in our lives and stuff, especially if it's amusing, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, you can find that at thelastexit.org. There's an archive that goes back. I think the earliest show in the archive you'll find is 1996. The latest shows are all up on Mixcloud, so you can stream them through the Mixcloud app, all completely free. Massive amounts of really cool music if you like heavy, dark music. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.